If
You
you,
make a good point about corporations controlling, but you need to rewind the clock thousands of years too, because the Roman Empire was no different with that amount of control they had over trade, commerce, productivity, invention, and control over a civilization. Literally, not a society, a civilization. So that amount of control, you might have called them back then, corporate entities as well. There were forests across the driest places. The Gobi Desert forest, Sahara Desert was a forest. Middle East was a forest. They don't call it the land of milk and honey for nothing. You're not like picking up sane grans and that's your milk.
right.
It was forests. So if you're looking at water flow and this sort of thing, that is a completely different environment where, that 6,000 years. But that West African monsoon is shifting and we are definitely coming back into a wet pattern. But it's not a modest. That's the whole thing. Everybody keeps, these debates that you would have with people, not you, Rex, but, a lot out there be like, well, it's just modern thing. It's in the last 30 years. No, I'm sorry, it's not. It's thousands of years old of the same exact structure, just, turning the pages of history, next chapter, but it's always this ingrained, like central control system with the wealth and the power to create systems around it to protect it, enrich it, just keeps moving along unchecked through history. So it's not a modern thing.
Boom. Ladies and gentlemen, we just look at it. David Dubine, Add Up 2030. We're going to talk about it. The world's gone crazy, literally insane. And I don't know if there's any slowing down in sight or if it's just going to gain more personalities.
So am I reading too much into it from the 2008 financial collapse and then the COVID coming in 2020? And that's why when you go back to some of these other ones there, Rex, on that previous Barry Center chart that you showed too, like the start and the end of the Vietnam War is in that one. And there has to be something energetic here that's going on.
What if 2030 is when the masters wake up from their hibernation chambers, their stasis, and it's connected to this point? Like they have in the technology to wake them up at that point in time because of the energy of the universe for whatever reason, or just maybe that's where they linked it. That's when they decide to wake up. Because I've thought about this before, and it wouldn't surprise me if we were seeded from a highly advanced civilization. If we were made to do the work for them, they would have technologies if they could create people and travel the stars, I'm sure, to slow their aging process, or to basically reverse their aging or not age for long periods of time, take long naps, come back in a couple thousand years. And maybe 2030 is that time when we're at that place in the universe where the alarm goes off, they wake up, and they go back to ruling for a certain amount of time, and then they go back to sleep again for a couple thousand years. I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at right now, the thoughts that are going through my mind. But
excellent. I'm glad that my thoughts are flowing, because I could put gold in the new BRICS currency and the new BRICS aligned nations that are going to have a gold, platinum, and silver-backed currency, and everything. All the gold needs to be in repositories accounted for in every nation of the planet, in the central banks, to back this new system. Now, there was a lot of gold in the wild in most of these other countries. You got to realize, everybody was laughing back in the day, just like a couple years ago. Oh, the BRICS are only 5 countries. We realize there's 120 nations that have joined on in those last 2 years. You'd think we'd be talking about the election, but lost in the noise is the greatest threat facing America's sovereignty. The dollar's being eviscerated as the U.S. is creating $100,000 of debt per second. The global de-dollarization trend is accelerating as BRICS nations introduce a new global currency called the unit. The unit would be pegged at 40% to gold and 60% to a basket of BRICS currencies. BRICS countries can mint the unit, a statement token, using the gold held within their borders. What do you think is going to happen with metals? Call the proud Americans of the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. And Patriot Gold Group has the No Fee for Life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold or silver. And you may qualify for the No Fee for Life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Give them a call, 888-546-7020 for your free investor guide today. And also, Patriot Gold Group, rated Consumer Affairs top gold IRA dealer 7 years in a row. That's 888-546-7020. And now on with the video.
Yeah,
Right now,
BRICS
I
is
just did
hot.
an article the other day. Russia was trading tangerine oranges to Pakistan for chickpeas and lentils. Now, they were in a 50,000 pound bundle. That was the cargo size for the swap. Now, it wasn't exactly the same on the trade value based on the kilograms and the price per kilogram. So there was an overage there of some $9,000. They had paid the difference in that in gold, credited to the other nation. So with the BRICS trading now and everything's coming on, BRICS, 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 you're hearing about it. Suddenly, every central bank in the world is bringing all that gold out of the wild. Like they're going to raise the prices where you're like, damn, 15,000 an ounce. I'll sell that. I can pay off my house. They're
Yeah.
going to get it so absurd because it doesn't matter for them. They're just going to print, 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 print money. It doesn't matter. Like a dollar value compared to the gold value. Yeah. Imagine if you made it $100,000 an ounce. I'm telling you, almost all gold on the planet would be sold.
Yeah.
And it would come back into a central warehouse somewhere and it would be accounted for down to the gram for the persons to pick it up, let's say. And those are the same ones you talk about that might need it for longevity or atmospheric control or whatever it is. But imagine if all the gold that was ever mined is really not, it's only this time in the last couple thousand years that the last previous, each 2,000-year iteration, it had been come and picked up. And we're just left at this time now. And we're like, look how much gold's around. But as soon as it all goes away and there's some sort of disaster or whatever, we'll just start back from zero again. And people will still find gold everywhere on the planet and just start warehousing it again. And then 2,000 or 3,000 years later, we'll have thousands of tons of gold laying around because the effort to get it, the gold will still be in the crust. We have not gotten all the gold out of the crust, I assure you. People panning every day. Up in Colorado, you guys gold pan up there? People gold panning?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, man.
Yeah. There's gold everywhere. I mean, it's everywhere. Still. And I mean, you might think, oh, the gold's gone. Well, there's still not even.
It's
So
just
I'm
a
just
lot
throwing that out there that
mine now.
it's being pulled into central repositories now in a quick fashion. And think about BRICS. If it continues for another 5 years and the gold price keeps going up, and we've seen gold go from what, 1,800 to 2,800 in a year or so. What if it goes from 28 to 58 to 15,000 to 25 to 30 to 40,000 in 5 years? All that gold, I assure you, people that weren't going to sell will absolutely sell it because then they can pay off and have a free life, basically.
And if you're a society or a civilization or a species or somebody that can live forever in perpetuity, and to take a 2,000-year nap is like taking a 2-hour nap for us, and you just put these things into motion. I am very skeptical about a lot of the ancient astronaut, ancient alien theories, especially the stuff that's pushed in the media. Um, especially the stuff that's pushed in the media. But we look at cycles and we look at what humanity is doing right now. We're creating robotics and artificial intelligence to do the work for us. Our planet is going through turmoil right now. The climate is in dire straits in many places, it appears. And so it reminds me of the stories that Sitchin wrote about with the 12th planet, where the Anunnaki had to mine gold. So they created us, or they modified a species to do the work for them to mine gold. And then their planet was dying. So they had to do something to the atmosphere to prevent it from dying. And look at all the modifications that we're doing to the planet right now, and all the news about geo modifications, changing the weather or attempting to change the weather and attempts to cool the planet. And the problem is now you've got so many people that think all the weather change is from the man. And then you have people that think none of it is. Well, why couldn't it be all of the above? I mean, why couldn't there be manipulation done with industrial factions, but it doesn't mean the whole thing's being controlled by the man? It's a little tiny piece to a much larger puzzle. Cycles, large cycles, etc.
We don't know what the perfect environment is for those that are taking naps if they were to reemerge. Perhaps our previous climate, let's say in the 1990s, when the skies were clear, there was really no geoengineering projects going on, solar activity was really high. very little cloud cover because, a high magnetic field really reduces a lot of clouds, low magnetic field or solar minimums, bringing a lot more cloud cover with the galactic cosmic rays. There's that inverse on more cosmic rays come in at solar lows. Perhaps that era of time and climate in the 1990s was the worst possible environment. Like they would step out and get scorched, or it was, something was just completely off for them. So the modifications now, perhaps enough modification was coming in if they understood the solar cycles and if they understood we are really coming into very low solar activity. And I would encourage you to look at European Space Agency, NASA, et cetera, forecasters coming out. Once we step off this, we're going into an extended, very deep low, not as deep as the Maunder minimum. But if you were looking at some kind of cloud cover and then in addition riding on top of to create more cloud cover, then perhaps that's the perfect environment. And they could emerge out for, let's say, how many years before then the sun would kick back on and then the cloud cover would dissipate. So they would have this window of time based on our solar activity and our current technology to seed clouds that it would give them that window of optimal CO2 concentration, optimal, let's say, dryness in an environment or wetness, because we don't know. It could be either or, because the amount of absurd floods happening on the planet, maybe that's what they need is a more like humid environment to be living in. So maybe they'll emerge where, massive record floods are occurring like all over Africa, which would be a seed point anyway. So I'm just curious about the optimal environment for those that you speak of would be, because once you can wire that in, then you can understand why a lot of these changes might be occurring on the planet to get ready for the return, to give the best possible environmental condition for them to walk through the soup, for a better term. And are we talking about a planetary thing here, or is it just regional?
They came from a planet around Sirius. There's the rulers of this planet, the seeders of this planet. That's where they came from. And now they've got this dynasty here, and I think some of them have compassion for us. Like some of them genuinely care about us, and others are like, nah, they're not really as concerned. They might look at us as problem makers. And, it makes me think of people that rip into artificial intelligence and such right now. And they fear it. So they blame everything on AI, or they fear something and they blame everything on that something. And then there's like people out there, they're like, wait a second, we use artificial intelligence every day in our everyday lives. And if they look at us like that, like if they did create us to do the work for them, if they did, they're like, hey, let's make a mini me. Let's make a bunch of miniature us. They wouldn't probably make them as big as they were. Like they wouldn't make us as big as they were. They probably wouldn't make us as smart as they were, or the same type of lifespan, because they would want to keep us in some type of control. And when I was bringing up the beginning, like it just seems like there's something that controls the military at certain high levels. And we look at a lot of the ancient Sumerian tablets and the biblical records and such. It seems like that's somewhere over there is where they established their dynasty. And for whatever reason, that's still extremely important, that location. And I don't know why. Is it like, is there a Stargate out there potentially, or some type of location that allows them to go in and out and go to their home and come back to their second home? But that's kind of what I'm picking up here with the research I've done, my theory as of right now. But then there's the whole Middle Earth theory as well. And I'm kind of conflicted because there's all that talk of Admiral Byrd going to the center of the earth on the North Pole and the South Pole and meeting these high level beings. And one of them is called the Master. And so, but I talked to one of the guys that went to Project High Jump with Admiral Byrd. He was, I think, 102 or 103 when I talked to him. It was a couple years ago. I've got the phone call. I'd like to share it with you eventually. I'm going to share it with the world. It's just a bad audio. But I was asking those questions. I'm like, did you see any of the stuff that they were talking about? And he just kept laughing. So I don't know if that diary is true or not. Have you read the diary? I finally listened to it several times because I really wanted to understand it before I talked about it. I had never researched it before until recently. There's so many people that believe it happened like that. Have you read the diary? Have you read it?
I've read the snippets of him flying in and that 100-mile wide hole or 70 miles wide that he was able to take his aircraft and fly into.
Yeah.
I want to say two things about this. The original seed point of humanity, whether it be the Indus Valley or over in, what do you call Sumeria, the Iraq area, the climate conditions were very different back then. That was full forest, rivers were running. So if you talk about some of the Antiquitech where they needed water to flow under the pyramids for, if you believe that there was such technology available, it was predicated on having water running under some sort of substrate that created the electrostatic charge to then power devices. None of that would be functional right now because there's not the water flow that would be required for any of this tech to work. Now, perhaps they know also that the hydrological cycle is shifting to the point where it's going to come back and it's going to start working again. They just need to dust it off, fix a few things, can reconnect a few granite blocks, and then we're back to the races again. And then maybe, sheet something in gold again. And then, it doesn't have to be all off planet. Like everybody's always talking about it. All the gold's going to be taken off planet. Perhaps not. Perhaps the gold is to refurbish some of this Antiquitech that got ruined, stripped, and therefore unusable during these last 7,000 years. There were forests across the driest places. The Gobi Desert forest. Sahara Desert was a forest. Middle East was a forest. They don't call it the land of milk and honey for nothing. You're not like picking up Seine grands and that's your milk.
Right.
It was forests. So if you're looking at water flow and this sort of thing, that is a completely different environment where, that 6,000 years. But that West African monsoon is shifting and we are definitely coming back into a wet pattern. Now, the reason I say that is I've seen so many maps from like the late 1400s, early mid 1500s that show massive mega lakes, river systems, estuaries, deltas all across what was and now desert as little as 500 years ago. So I'm like, either they got really old maps that they were copying down that showed during that 6,000 year interval, or that mid-Holocene is what they really call it, or they'd actually seen that and mapped it out, the cartographers of the day versus copying source maps. There's only one of two plausible explanations. There's only two. A, they were copying older maps from previous times, and then they were adding in some of their own, okay, this mountain, well, it's no longer tree covered like it is, so we can like draw it like that, but the river used to come here, so, or they actually witnessed it and they saw it. And then when you come up to some of these same old maps, 1500s, early 1600s, they show the North Pole with land masses up there in a central hole. And even now, if you look on wind maps at Windy, you can start to see right where the North Pole is, there's some perturbation where the wind is wrapping around something up there. And if you combine the old with the new, and we start to get, why can't we ever fly over the North Pole? Shouldn't it be just the fastest way to go across the planet? I mean, you're telling me you're yapping on about global warming and gases and everything, but I can't go from like England to China just skipping over the North Pole. You mean I got to go all the way around it? I can't just like hop over the top. Reason why? And don't tell me it's for the military. Like people are flying through war zones. Like which aircraft or commercial aircraft. That excuse does not hold any water whatsoever, except trying to hide something. Now, is there a hole going into the center of the earth? I don't know. But here in East Tennessee, it is so cavernous that some of these caverns run from here up to like Virginia, hundreds of miles underground. I'm talking caverns because the military used to use them down here for stockpiling things, extra water reservoirs during World War II. And these places are vast and they are hundreds of miles connecting under the earth here. And that's just right at the surface going down, like walking a staircase into a cave system. And if you know how to go, you could walk 100 miles in a direction and pop out in a different state. That's just here right on the surface. So can you imagine what is deeper inside that we have either been cut off, and they can shotcrete something. So imagine if you had better tech where you could actually melt the rock so it doesn't look like shotcrete blocking an entrance. Could there not be other vast cave systems? Because right here, I own some property and we have a mountain here. And just on the other side of the mountain, because I was asking a couple guys about some caves around here, because they grew up here and they hunt and everything. And it's like, oh, there's 4 or 5 really big ones around here. One is a stream that goes through that backs up and it floods this area because too much water can't get through. When it rains a lot, all the water can't get through the cave. But when it goes really dry like it is now, you can walk 2-3 miles into it and then it pops out on the other side of another valley. But then there's another one just over here They say it's about 4 miles in, and they never came to the end of it. These guys that I know, pretty much a straight shot. They think it connects up to Ruby Falls somewhere, some about 15, 20 miles from here. And they said they, as kids, they would walk 4 or 5 miles in there, hours and hours and hour, extra light, water, and they never came remotely close to the end of it. And that's just here, just in the mountains and like limestone caves you can access. Like there's vast cave systems just here in East Tennessee, let alone the rest of the planet. And you know how many there are, Rex. I mean, you're deep into the history. You know how many cave complexes and systems. The world probably has more cave area than it does farmland on the planet.
That's incredible, man. Well, and you know, the description of these people that live inner Earth, highly advanced, you know, tall, they have flying saucers and super technologies. And so there was that influx of flying saucers in the late 40s and 50s when there was a lot of military testing going on. And there's two theories on, well, there's a few theories. One theory is they come from Zeta Reticuli, and they're like, well, we're from Zeta Reticuli, you know, we're 50 trillion miles away, but it affects all of us when you launch nukes. And then the other theory is it's just nonsense. You know, the other theory is it's nonsense. I know one theory, I guess there's a few theories, interdimensional, like it opens up a portal so they come in through a different dimension. One, the theory that makes the best sense on that, let's say these flying saucers are legit, they're from Earth. So they don't, like, if you nuke the outside of the Earth, it's going to have an effect on the inside of the Earth, much more than Zeta Reticuli will. And what a great way to hide that. What a great way to control the narrative. Oh, they're from out there. So meanwhile, the real stuff that's going on is like hidden in the shadows. And then the stuff that's being manipulated is being pushed in the media, and you're creating that archetype. It's just like a whole cloak and dagger kind of thing. Once again, cloak and dagger, look over here, not over there, wag the dog kind of stuff. What's really going on? I don't know, man. I want you to listen to this interview that I did with this gentleman, because he sounded like, yeah, he was hard of hearing. He's 102 years old. We're talking on the phone, but he sounded as sharp as a tack. And all the questions I asked, maybe I didn't ask him the questions the right way, but he just laughed at it. And then when I listened to that diary a few times by Admiral Byrd, like at the very end of the diary, it says something negative about the military industrial complex, but the way that it was written out, I'm like, is this fabricated? Did Admiral Byrd really write all this stuff in the diary like this? And then the last thing he wrote was, you know, the bad military industrial complex. I don't know. It kind of sounded like Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, when he resigned, or when he basically he resigned in his last speech, but in his final speech to the public, he's like, I'm glad to be a civilian. I'm glad to get, you know, the military industrial complex is evil, is basically what he said, the way that I perceived it. And it reminded me a bit of that Eisenhower speech. You heard the Eisenhower speech, right?
Yeah, and you got to realize that was like 80 years ago.
Yeah. Wow.
Can you imagine how, like, if they were terrified of it 80, almost a century ago, you know, that put it into perspective there. Because, you know, we think about Leave It to Beaver, Wholesome. That was before that. That was before Leave It to Beaver, man. Like, you know, this is a kind of post-World War II. You think it's that the era back then was so pure, and, you know, the environment was clean, which it was. There were a lot more animals, you know, wholesome manners, you know, common sense. Like there was a set of moral code that was adhered to. I mean, everybody fought for 5 years to try to preserve some certain core values of, you know, one part of the world. So we thought that was like a golden era of, you know, reliability and, you know, more of a truthful age, and the rock solid, like I say, that core age, that common core of like wholesomeness and goodness. Like that is kind of the picture it's painted. When you go back prior to that, before the formation of the Federal Reserve, it was like people living in log cabins. So it's really hard to equate those two, except real rustic living, very pioneering lifestyle. You know, it took forever to get even the first cities started in the 1920s. Everybody was farming in the 1920s. Like 90% of all of America was farming in the 1920s. So then, you know, it's hard. It's really hard to recollect that era and put like a something to it, because it was so vastly spread out and everybody was very self-sufficient. It was just such a different age. They didn't have telecommunication. Damn, people didn't even get the telephone in their houses and the electricity running in there until later. You know, we're kind of at that age of telephone got introduced. and electric got introduced. And then we skip forward into World War II, and then suddenly, we're flying around in jet airplanes within 20 years. Crazy jump in technology in 20 years. But then, that mental image you have of that time was like really a pure age of goodness and wholesomeness, if I can say something like that. Maybe I have the wrong interpretation, but comparatively to today, it was like it's safer to walk a street back then in the 1940s than it would be today. And that kind of industrial complex was that vast and that active back then. So I'm just trying to, paint the equation there for you.
Great point. In 100 years, we've gone from 95% of the population farming to being self-sufficient to 0.5% of the population farming. And most of those are big corporate farms that are just massive, little tiny house, $100,000 tractors, and huge farms. And most of these farms, unfortunately, in America are filled with pesticides all in your corn. You're going to love it. It's delicious.
You make a good point about corporations controlling, but you need to rewind the clock thousands of years too, because the Roman Empire was no different with that amount of control they had over trade, commerce, productivity, invention, and control over a civilization. Literally, not a society, a civilization. So that amount of control, you might have called them back then, corporate entities as well. But it's not a modest. That's the whole thing. Everybody keeps, these debates that you would have with people, not you, Rex, but, a lot out there be like, well, it's this modern thing. It's in the last 30 years. No, I'm sorry. It's not. It's thousands of years old of the same exact structure, just, turning the pages of history, next chapter, but it's always this ingrained, like, central control system with the wealth and the power to create systems around it to protect it, enrich it, and whatever that residue is, some of it called pollution, some of it called wasteland, whatever you like, destruction, just keeps moving along unchecked through history. So it's not a modern thing. Perhaps that's what the whole thing about 2030 is. Maybe it's to bring us to the collapse phase where only the skilled will be able to get through, because the skilled people are going to be able to, re-engineer some stuff to move it down the line until we kind of get back into the 1860s and then rebuild from there again. Unskilled, yeah, they'll live as hunter-gatherers and stuff, and that's cool. There's a lot of people I feel will survive this collapse incredibly well because they're never on electricity in the first place. But in terms of they will stay there for another century or two while the rest of the world runs away as these reinventors come along and reinvent their world again. And we're going to loop it right back in 200 years. Same people will be in the same spots, or maybe it's 400. The people that are still living subsistence, that are very little without electricity, will still be living that way 200 to 400 years from now. The ones that are reinventors will have the technology once again. And, you can kind of see the system come and go, come and go, come and go. So maybe it is just all about the reset of unskilled labor versus skilled labor, because you're going to have too many angry people during this change wanting too much change that the governments can't offer them. So maybe that's the 2030 event, I guess, where at that point, from 5 years from now, so many people will be so angry with nothing to do, and governments will no longer be able to cope with them, that it'll be a reset time. I'm just saying, and that's it. Thanks for listening to my rambles too. Bye for now.